Hi, everybody. So today we're going to be talking about Chapter 5. So we're going to kind of review all the main concepts before you go to take the practice test so that you are ready for this upcoming test of Chapter 5. So right now, make sure you have your math composition notebook out and make sure that you are writing down everything that's on my screen. This is good review. It's also going to be good to have everything in one place for your test. So writing these things down again will kind of help with the muscle memory. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is 5.1, which is ratios and rates. And we're just going to remind ourselves of a couple definitions. So, reminder, first definition that I'd like you to write down is ratio. And a ratio is a comparison of two quantities using division. Okay, so there's three different ways that you might see a ratio. The first way is in a fraction. Okay, so fraction form. The other way is with a 2 in between it. And then the other way is with a semicolon in between it, or a colon. Sorry, not a colon. Okay, so those are the different ways that you might see a ratio. And essentially, it's a comparison of two quantities. So, like I've said in class, a ratio for our class would be 22 students to one teacher. And you could write that as 22 over 1. You could write that as 22 colon 1. There's many different ways to do that, but that essentially is a ratio. How many is there of this to this? A rate is a ratio of two quantities with different units. So this is the key thing to recognize, different units. So notice, you're going to write a rate when these units are not the same. So these are different units. So make sure that you note that. Rate is a ratio of two quantities with different units. And then finally, so that's our second definition. And then finally, our third definition is a rate with a denominator of 1 is called a unit rate. So make sure that we underline this, denominator of 1. That tells us that it's going to be a unit rate if the denominator is 1. So for example, if we were to take this rate up here, 60 miles over 2 hours, and I want to get my denominator to 1, I'm always going to divide. Okay, so I'm typically always going to divide. So I'm going to divide by 2. And remember, if I do it to the bottom denominator, I have to do it to the numerator as well. So I divide the top and the bottom by 2, and that's going to give me 30 miles over 1 hour. So unit rate has to be a 1 in the denominator. That is the one thing that you have to make sure that you are doing. All right. Okay, make sure those definitions are down in your book. Okay, so here we're going to find the unit rate. So a lot of us get confused on which one do we put in the numerator, which one do we put in the denominator. So you always want to read what they're asking, okay? So if they say the unit rate for 180 miles in 3 hours, whichever one is last in that sentence is always going to be in the denominator. So you're going to set it up as the last one in the denominator, the first one in the numerator. So it kind of goes in order, right? You do have to be careful because with a table, if you had a table, you want to make sure to read the sentence that it actually tells you to find and make sure that you use that to set up your fraction and not the table, okay? So if we have 180 miles over 3 hours, to get our unit rate, we need 1 in the denominator. So I'm going to divide the top and the bottom by 3. And that is going to give me 60 miles over 1 hour. And essentially what that is telling us is our unit rate is 60 miles per hour. Okay? So unit rate equals 60 miles per hour. All right. And that is pretty much the gist of 5.1. We got unit rate, we got rate, and we got ratios. Okay? So make sure that you have all those definitions down. Now let's move to 5.2, which is proportions. So remember here, the key idea. A proportion is an equation stating that two ratios are equivalent. Two quantities that form a proportion are proportional. So read this over here. So we have 2/3 and we have 4/6. So the thing about a proportion is if you can reduce down both fractions and they equal each other, you know it's a proportion. So 2/3 is already simplified down as far as it can go. But 4/6, we could divide by 2, and that would give us 2/3, which, are these the same? Yes, they're the same, which means they are a proportion, okay? So that's kind of the deal with proportions. So let's see, tell whether the ratios form a proportion. So I have 4/6 and I have 18/24. So let's look here. What could we reduce 4/6 by? What could we divide the 4 and the 6 by? Hopefully you're thinking 2. So I could do, that would make it 2/3. Now let's look at 18/24. What could we divide? What's the greatest common factor of 18 and 24? What about 6? 6. Let's look. Well, 18 divided by 6 would be 3. 24 divided by 6 would be 4, right? So that's 3/4. And that can't be reduced down. So are these the same when they're reduced? No, which means, are they a proportion? No. So they are not proportional. Okay, so you can simplify it down and see, do they equal each other? The other way that you can figure out if ratios form a proportion is with cross product. And the way you would do that is with cross product, you multiply the diagonals like this, and then you set them equal to each other. If they equal each other, then you know they're a proportion. So let's try the ones from above. So let's do 4/6 equals 18/24. We're going to do it the cross product way and see what we get. So we multiply the diagonals. 4 times 24 equals, and then the other diagonals, 6 times 18. And then we do the multiplication in our calculator. 4 times 24, that equals 96. Equals 6 times 18. That equals 108. And I know, do those equal each other? No. So since they do not equal each other, they are not a proportion. They're not proportional. Okay? So you can see, you can either figure out if two ratios are proportioned by simplifying the fractions or by doing cross product and see if they equal each other. Okay? So that's 5.2. Let's move down to writing proportions. So one way to write proportions is to use a table. Okay, so this is one that you probably saw a lot in 5.3. So make sure that you know you can use either columns or rows to write proportions. So if we use columns, okay, so if we're using columns, remember columns go from the top to the bottom. So we would do this right here and this right here. So we would set it up like this. 2 ringtones over $6 equals 3 ringtones over X dollars. Okay, so your numerators are always going to have the same unit. Numerator and denominators have the same units. So notice in the numerators, our unit is ringtones. And in the denominator, our units are dollars. Okay, so that is something to note. Now let's look at rows. So writing a proportion using rows. So we would go this way. Okay, so we would have 2 ringtones over 3 ringtones equals $6 over X dollars. So notice that the units are on each side of the proportion. So with this one, notice that you have the same units on each side of the equal sign. So ringtones are on the left, dollars are on the right. So those are the two ways that you would write a proportion, okay? And that's in 5.3. And then finally, we have 5.4, which is solving proportions. So there's 3 methods that they give us for solving proportions. The first one is use mental math, okay? And that's to say, okay, how did they get from 7 to 28? Well, I can say that they multiplied by 4. So then to get from 2 to x, you need to also multiply by 4. So I know that x will equal 2 times 4 is 8. So I know x will equal 8. So that's the first method. The second method would be use the multiplication property of equality. So for that one, what we would do is let's write the proportion. And what you would do, remember, it's just your algebra. So you would multiply by 28 over 1 for both sides, okay? And when you do that, these cancel out. We're left with x equals. And then look over here. Can we cross cancel on the left? Yeah, we could divide both by 7. So that's going to give me 4 on top, 1 on the bottom. So 4 times 2 over 1 times 1 is just going to give me 8. Okay, and then look, we got x equals 8 there as well. Okay, and then finally, our third method is use the cross products property. And this is probably the property that you'll get used to using the most, just because use our algebra skills. It's pretty simple. This is the method that I would use the most, just because it is pretty simple to me. But again, there's 3 different methods, so choose the one you like the best. So for this one, we are going to multiply the diagonals together. So we're going to do 2 times 28 equals 7 times x. So let's multiply this out. We are going to have 2 times 28 equals 56 equals 7x. And then to isolate my x, remember you need to divide both sides by 7. And that is going to give me x equals 8. Which, look, we got the same thing using each different method. Okay, so as you can see, we got x equals 8 for every single one. So those are your 3 methods for solving proportions. That is pretty much chapter 5. So now you're going to go work on the practice test, which will help prepare you for the test. Good luck. Thanks for watching.